Hey guys, Michael Paris here. I am going to be making a video on how to get started with your own website. I make videos daily now, whether it's science, computer science, mathematics, physics, biology, chemistry, you name it. I try to provide another layer of depth, at least more than your typical YouTube videos, so they're hopefully going to be quite engaging. Definitely subscribe, and I hope you enjoy the video. So I am going to be making a video on getting started with making a website. So there are many things that people don't know when looking to make a website, and often being misinformed leads to making really bad decisions, and some of these decisions can be quite costly. So hopefully I can give you some of those initial bits of information that can prove really useful in the long run. So when a client calls me and asks me, hey, I'm looking to make a website, where do I get started? I know literally nothing about websites. I tend to break it down into 4 categories. So you have 1, your domain name, 2, your host, 3, your code, your actual website, and 4, your SSL certificate. So to go through each, the first one would be your domain name. When you open up your browser and you go to, say, google.com or facebook.com, whatever it is, that domain name is what you pay for, and it costs about $10 a year, and sometimes it can be a few thousands, but generally speaking they're about $10 a year, and that's between you and your domain name registrar. So this is not between your host and not between the programmer. They can do it for you, but the relationship is between you and the domain name registrar. And as a site owner, you should always have this fundamental level of control, because when you own the domain name, that is the most important thing. Now, the reason why we have domain names, in short, humans are very good with names and robots are really good with IP addresses. The computer or the internet doesn't really know what a name is, it only knows an IP address. And if we had to memorize an IP address every time you wanted to access a website, that would suck. So having a domain name allows us to map a name to an IP address. So that's essentially your domain name. The second thing would be your host. So there's a lot to say about this. I'll keep it simple, but for a host, there's 3 different categories. There's shared hosting, semi-private hosting, and private hosting. So the middle one, semi-private, is a little artificial and arbitrary, but really they're shared hosting and private hosting or dedicated hosting. So shared hosting costs about between $4 to $10 a month, and it's complete shit. So right off the bat, I highly don't recommend it, especially if you're trying to be professional in any way. Consider that a no-go. Shared hosting has a tremendous amount of flaws. For starters, you're sharing the pipeline of bandwidth with hundreds of other neighbors, and your speed, your site's consistency, your site's ranking sometimes are dependent on things that are out of your control, are dependent on things that your neighbor is doing. So for example, if your neighbor has a ton of traffic on their website, your site will slow down or even go offline. If your site is if your neighbor is hosting pornography or illegal content, sometimes these Google bots, these bots that pretty much index your website and give you SEO ranking, sometimes can't dissociate between domain names on a server and can blacklist the entire server, and your ranking can plummet and you'll never know why. Also, when you're on shared hosts, they can just cut you for no reason. Your website goes down, support is horrible. I can talk for hours about shared hosting. Don't do it. It's not fast, it's not reliable, and it's not consistent. Next is that sweet spot. It's called semi-private hosting. So it's kind of like shared hosting, but there's a very small amount of people on the server, and it's heavily monitored. This allows you to pay much less for those who can't afford dedicated or private hosting. You get on semi-private, you pay much less, it's quite consistent, you'll be quite happy. Then you have dedicated hosting or private hosting, and there are little bits of differences between various private kinds of hostings, but to keep it simple, you're in your own neighborhood, all the speeds are directly to you, you have no dependencies, you're not sharing the pipeline with anyone, and this is for someone who wants to really develop a powerhouse of a web system, and I recommend that. And for the price range, I would say that shared hosting is about $4, semi-private can be between $25 and $35. So that's hosting. Third thing is your website, the sweet spot. So this is where you hire a web developer. This is probably the part where people make the greatest mistakes on. I also break this down into 3 categories, ironically. So essentially there's your Wix, and so there's your make-it-yourself websites, then you have your WordPress templates, and then you have your WordPress custom-made websites. So for the Wix, again, bottom of the barrel, don't even consider anything do-it-yourself. It usually doesn't allow you to make a powerful branded system. Anyone who comes across a Wix or a Squarespace site, and some of those Squarespace sites, I must say, aren't too bad, but in general, you come across a Wix website, and it's extremely obvious that it's a shitty website and it's Wix and you're pretty much getting it for free. Don't do it, especially if you're trying to be professional. Listen, if you're running a babysitting service in your basement, then hey, why not? But anything more than that, I don't recommend it. So after you've kind of ruled that out, then you have your WordPress templates. So listen, you're starting out, I get it. You don't have a big budget. It's not a bad option. Buy a template for about 60, 70 bucks and get a programmer to tweak it. But there are many cons to this. So these templates are generally really horribly built, not necessarily because they're programmed in a bad way, which often they are, but they make use of features that are very generic. So sometimes there's all these plugins in there that are security issues. Also, they're designed to be as abstract or vague as possible. They're designed to accommodate the greatest pool of clients, the greatest potential pool of clients. So if someone makes a template, they want it kind of to adapt to a photographer, or they want it to adapt to someone using it as a lumberjack or a doctor or a lawyer, and it's got all these extra bells and whistles that you don't actually end up using. So you're buying this powerhouse. You're ordering, as my teacher would say, you're ordering this 18-wheeler truck to deliver a pie of pizza. You're only using about 5% or 10% of the system's features, and you've got all this additional overhead. It really slows you down. Also, it doesn't look branded at all. It looks really generic. As nice as they sometimes look, it will look very generic. Also, editing the code of a template is often a nightmare. So when you want to make custom changes, you really don't have a solid foundation. It's kind of like building on a mudslide. It's not recommended if you want long-term success. It's not recommended if you want something that you're going to be entirely content with. And comes the last option. You've got your custom WordPress templates. This is the good stuff. This is particularly what I do. And this is where I tailor make a site based on the client's needs. So it's heavily branded. I just look at their logo, I look at their colors. It's all designed from the bottom up. And it's WordPress, which is amazing because I don't have to rebuild an entire back end. It comes with all these awesome features that I get to give to my client, and I essentially just focus on what the client needs. And this can be expensive. I mean, doing custom work really is work. It can range between a few $100 to $10,000–$20,000. It really depends on what you're doing. It really depends on what the web developer wants and the type of quality that you're expected to deliver. Let me just say this: if you are building a custom-made WordPress site, you need to be clear. You don't need someone who knows WordPress, because someone saying that they know WordPress can be very misleading. That's the best way to put it. Someone says that I know WordPress. It can just mean they know how to use the WordPress system. It doesn't mean they know how to get under the hood and make complex and much needed changes, or really customize your system with all the proper bells and whistles. So if you're going to hire someone for a WordPress website, make sure they know PHP, make sure they know MySQL, make sure they know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, make sure they know it all really, really well. Knowing WordPress is nothing. It's not enough. You obviously need to know WordPress, but you got to know a lot more than that. Now, next would be the SSL certificate. There's not much to say about that. If you are doing transactions online, there is another charge. It costs between $50 to maybe $100 a year if you're getting a basic DV SSL certificate. There's new movements like Let's Encrypt that are offering free SSLs. They have some slight limitations, but it's still wonderful. It's a great movement. Generally, you want to pay $55 a year. It might cost a few bucks to install it. What it does is it secures a connection between the client and the server. So if you're submitting sensitive information like a credit card, you can feel confident that no one is sniffing on your information or stealing that credit card. Generally, that's it. Take your time, be patient, really do your homework for a website. Don't go to a developer until you have all your content, until you know what you want, until you have the idea in your head and you just need someone to bring it to life. When you build the idea as you're building the website, there's so much redundancy, you end up redoing so much stuff, it creates complications between you and the developer. Come organized, do your homework, know what you want, then hire the developer, and you'll likely get a system you're very happy with. Enjoy.